The bell rang at Jefferson High, sharp and loud, cutting through the chatter of students shuffling between classes. Most kids hurried, some laughing, some groaning about homework, others rushing to beat the lunch line. But one girl moved differently. She didn't rush. She didn't laugh. She kept her head down, shoulders slightly hunched like she was trying to disappear into the hallway's beige walls. Her backpack was worn at the edges, the zipper held together with a safety pin, and her shoes had been resoled twice. She wasn't trying to stand out. In fact, she'd spent the last 2 years doing everything she could not to. She slipped into room 214 just before the final bell, sliding into her usual seat in the back corner, third row from the window, farthest from the door. It was her safe spot. From there, she could see the whole classroom without being seen herself. The desk had a small chip on the right corner, and she often traced it with her finger when her mind wandered, which was more often than her teachers realized. Mr. Delaney stood at the front, already writing on the board in thick, impatient strokes. He was in his late 50s with thinning gray hair combed neatly to one side and a permanent crease between his eyebrows. He'd taught math at Jefferson for over 25 years, and he prided himself on keeping standards high. To him, that meant no hand-holding, no excuses, and definitely no coddling. He believed struggle built character, and if a student couldn't keep up, well, maybe they weren't cut out for his class. The girl didn't mind his sternness. What bothered her was how he looked at her sometimes, like she was wasting his time just by being there. She never raised her hand, never asked questions, never turned in flashy projects, but she listened. Oh, she listened. Every word, every example, every explanation. She soaked it all in like dry soil after rain. Today's lesson was on differential equations, advanced stuff, even for this honors-level calculus class. Most students groaned when they saw the symbols on the board. One kid muttered, "Man, I'm going to fail this test," and another flipped open his notebook with a sigh that sounded like surrender. But the girl? Her eyes lit up just a little, not enough for anyone to notice. But inside, her mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots, seeing patterns. She loved math. Not because it was easy, though it often was, but because it made sense. Numbers didn't lie. Equations had answers, even if they were hidden. Unlike life, which felt messy and unfair, math was honest. When she solved a tough problem, it felt like unlocking a secret door. And she'd been unlocking doors like that since she was 8 years old, sitting on the floor of her apartment with a library book on algebra, teaching herself while her little brother napped on the couch. Her home wasn't much, a 2-bedroom unit on the edge of town, with peeling paint and a fridge that hummed too loudly. Her mom worked as a home health aide, often leaving before sunrise and coming back long after dark. Some nights dinner was just rice and canned beans. Some mornings the girl got her brother ready for school, packed his lunch, walked him to the bus stop, and then ran the half-mile back to catch her own bus, all before 7 a.m. She didn't complain. She never had. But it meant homework often got pushed to the bottom of the list. By the time she finished chores, helped her brother with his reading, and made sure the lights were off to save on the electric bill, she was too tired to tackle calculus problems. So her grades? They were okay, not great, not terrible. B- mostly. Enough to stay in the honors track, but not enough to draw attention. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Because attention meant questions. Questions meant explanations. And explanations meant admitting things she didn't want anyone to know. Like how sometimes she went to school hungry, or how she wore the same sweater 3 days in a row because it was the only clean one, or how she'd once cried in the library bathroom after overhearing someone say, "She acts like she's better than us just 'cause she's quiet." So she stayed small, quiet, invisible, but inside her mind was a storm of ideas, connections, and calculations. She could look at a leaf falling from a tree and think about its velocity, air resistance, the angle of descent. She could hear a song on the radio and wonder about the mathematical ratios behind musical harmony. She read old math textbooks at the public library on weekends, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She'd finished a college-level linear algebra book last summer, solving every problem in the margins with a pencil she sharpened with a pocket knife. No one knew, not her teachers, not her classmates, not even her mom, who was too exhausted to notice the worn spines of advanced math books hidden under her daughter's bed. Back in class, Mr. Delaney turned from the board, chalk dust on his sleeve. "All right," he said, voice firm. "This is the kind of problem you'll see on the final. If you can't solve this, you're not ready." He pointed to a complex equation filled with derivatives, integrals, and Greek letters that made half the class shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few students exchanged nervous glances. One pulled out his phone under the desk, probably to snap a picture for later. Another chewed on the end of her pen, eyes wide with panic. The girl, though, just stared at the board. Her fingers twitched slightly like they wanted to reach for chalk. In her head, she was already simplifying the expression, spotting a substitution that would turn the whole thing into something manageable. She saw the path clearly, like a trail through the woods only she could see, but she didn't say a word. She lowered her eyes to her notebook and pretended to copy the problem, even though she didn't need to. She wrote slowly, carefully, making sure her handwriting looked ordinary. She didn't want to seem too eager, too smart, too different. Mr. Delaney paced the front of the room, arms crossed. "I expect you all to understand this by Friday. No excuses. If you're struggling, come see me after school." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "But don't waste my time if you haven't even tried." The girl flinched, just a tiny movement, barely noticeable. But it was there, because she had tried, every single day. She just couldn't always show it in the ways teachers expected. The rest of class dragged. Students asked basic questions, and Mr. Delaney answered them with growing impatience. When the bell finally rang, the girl was one of the first out the door, but not because she was eager to leave. She had to get to the library before it closed. There was a new book on partial differential equations she'd been waiting for, and she'd promised the librarian she'd return last week's stack today. As she walked down the hall, a group of girls passed by, laughing loudly about a party that weekend. One of them glanced at her and whispered something that made the others giggle. The girl didn't look up. She just tightened her grip on her backpack strap and kept walking. Outside, the sky was gray, threatening rain. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and started the 10-minute walk to the library. Her shoes squeaked on the wet pavement. She passed a bus stop where a man sat reading a newspaper, a coffee cup steaming in his hands. She passed a bakery with the smell of fresh bread drifting out the door, warm and comforting, but far out of her price range. At the library, she waved to Mrs. Ruiz, the librarian who always saved new math books for her. "There you are." Mrs. Ruiz smiled, pushing a thick volume across the counter. "Just came in yesterday. Thought of you right away." The girl's face lit up, really lit up, for the first time all day. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You know, you could join the math club at school. They meet Thursdays. I heard they're looking for new members." The girl's smile faded. She shook her head. I don't think so. I've got stuff at home." Mrs. Ruiz studied her for a moment, then nodded gently. "All right, but the offer stands." Back home that evening, after helping her brother with his homework and washing the dinner dishes, the girl sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the new book open in front of her. Rain tapped gently on the window. The only light came from a small desk lamp with a flickering bulb. She read for 2 hours straight, pencil in hand, scribbling notes in the margins, working through examples, testing theories. At one point she laughed, a quiet, surprised laugh, when she realized a shortcut that even the textbook hadn't mentioned. It was a tiny victory, but it filled her with a quiet joy no one else could see. Later, as she lay in bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of some unknown country, she thought about tomorrow's class. Would Mr. Delaney call on her? Would someone notice how fast she solved the warm-up problem? Would she finally slip up and show too much? She turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the wall like a lighthouse beam. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself so softly no one could hear. Just stay quiet. Just get through. But deep down she knew something was building, like pressure in a sealed container. Sooner or later it would have to let out, and when it did, everything might change. For now, though, she was just the quiet girl in the back row, the one no one noticed, the one everyone underestimated, and that was okay. Because while they saw a girl who barely spoke, who wore old clothes and never raised her hand, she knew the truth. She wasn't just keeping up, she was miles ahead. The week before finals always turned Jefferson High into a pressure cooker. Lockers slammed harder. Hallways buzzed with last-minute study plans and panicked whispers. Even the usually laid-back cafeteria workers moved faster, as if the stress was contagious. In room 214, the tension was thicker than usual. Mr. Delaney had been in a mood all week. Shorter answers, sharper tone, eyes that narrowed every time a student asked a question he'd already explained twice. The girl sat in her usual spot, back row, near the window. She'd stayed up until 2 a.m. the night before, not because she was struggling, but because she'd gotten lost in a problem about fluid dynamics she'd found online. It had nothing to do with her class, but once her mind latched onto a puzzle, it wouldn't let go until it was solved. She'd finally cracked it just as the sky began to lighten, and now she was running on 3 hours of sleep and a granola bar she'd saved from lunch 2 days ago. She tried to focus as Mr. Delaney reviewed for the final. He paced like a caged animal, marker in hand, scribbling equations on the whiteboard with quick, angry strokes. "This isn't just about passing a test," he said, voice tight. "This is about discipline, about respect for the subject. If you walk into that exam without understanding the fundamentals, you're wasting everyone's time, including your own." A few students shifted in their seats. One boy raised his hand hesitantly. "Mr. Delaney, can you go over the chain rule again? I still don't get how it applies to implicit differentiation." Mr. Delaney sighed like he'd been personally offended. "We've gone over this 3 times. If you're not getting it by now, maybe you should have paid attention the first time." The boy shrank back, face red. The girl winced. She knew that feeling, the hot shame of being called out even when you were trying your best. She wanted to speak up, to explain it in a way that might make sense, but she bit her tongue. Speaking up meant attention. Attention meant risk. Instead, she doodled in the margin of her notebook, not random shapes, but tiny, precise graphs of functions she was mentally testing. No one noticed. They never did. The class dragged on. Mr. Delaney assigned a set of practice problems, and the room filled with the scratch of pencils and the occasional frustrated groan. The girl finished hers in under 10 minutes. She checked her answers twice, then quietly closed her notebook and stared out the window. Outside, a sparrow hopped along the windowsill, pecking at something invisible. She watched it, letting her mind rest. But Mr. Delaney was watching her too. He'd noticed her stillness, her lack of struggle, and in his mind that didn't mean she understood, it meant she didn't care. To him, effort was visible. It was furrowed brows, chewed pencils, hands raised in confusion. Quiet confidence looked like apathy, and apathy in his classroom was unacceptable. "All right," he said suddenly, cutting through the quiet hum of work. "Let's see if anyone's actually paying attention." The class froze. Pencils stopped mid-scratch. Everyone looked up. Mr. Delaney turned to the board and wrote a new equation. Long, complex, layered with derivatives, integrals, and a tricky nonlinear term. It wasn't on the syllabus. It wasn't even in the textbook. It was the kind of problem graduate students might see in their second year of college. He'd pulled it from an old competition he'd judged years ago, just to shake things up. "This," he said, tapping the board with his marker, "is a real-world modeling problem. It describes the rate of change in a chemical reaction under variable pressure. Solve it fully, show every step." Silence, no one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Mr. Delaney scanned the room, his gaze landing finally on the girl in the back. She was still looking out the window, unaware. Her calmness, her detachment was the last straw. "You," he said, pointing. "Since you seem so relaxed, why don't you come up and show us how it's done?" Every head turned. Her stomach dropped like a stone in water. She blinked slowly as if waking from a dream. For a second, she just stared at him, heart hammering against her ribs. Then, without a word, she stood. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She walked to the front, the sound of her shoes on the linoleum floor echoing louder than they should have. She stopped in front of the board. The equation loomed above her, intimidating, almost mocking. But then something shifted. As she read it, really read it, her fear began to melt away. Not because it was easy, but because it was interesting. The structure was elegant once you saw past the clutter. There was a substitution hidden in the middle, a clever trick that would simplify everything. She'd seen something like it in that library book last week. She picked up a piece of chalk. It felt cool and familiar in her fingers. Behind her, the class held its breath. Some students exchanged glances. One whispered, "She's gonna cry." Another muttered, "Why'd he pick her? She never says anything." Mr. Delaney crossed his arms, waiting. He expected hesitation, maybe a wrong first step, maybe her standing there, frozen, until he had to tell her to sit down. That's what usually happened when he put a student on the spot like this. It was a lesson in humility, and in his mind, motivation. But the girl didn't hesitate. She wrote the first line cleanly, confidently. Then the second. She didn't rush, but she didn't stall either. Her hand moved with a quiet certainty that surprised even her. Each step flowed into the next like water finding its path downhill. She used a method most high schoolers wouldn't know, separation of variables combined with an integrating factor, but she didn't show off. She just solved it step by step as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A few students leaned forward. One pulled out his phone and started recording. Not to mock, but because something strange was happening. The air in the room changed. It wasn't tension anymore. It was curiosity. Wonder even. Mr. Delaney's arms uncrossed. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He took a half step forward, then stopped himself. At the board, the girl reached the final step. She simplified the expression, boxed the answer, and stepped back. She turned to face the class, chalk still in her hand, and waited. Silence. Then from the back, someone whispered, "No way." Another voice. "Did she just solve that?" Mr. Delaney cleared his throat. "That's incorrect," he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You skipped a critical step. You can't just assume that substitution works here." The girl looked at him, not with defiance, not with anger, just quiet clarity. "It does work," she said softly, "because the function is Lipschitz continuous on the interval, so the solution is unique. The substitution is valid." The room went even quieter. Mr. Delaney blinked. "Lipschitz?" He hadn't used that term all year. "Most college freshmen wouldn't know it." She nodded. "Yes, it's in the existence and uniqueness theorem for ODEs. Page 142 of the Boyce and DiPrima textbook. I checked it last week at the library. Now even the students who barely passed algebra were sitting up straight." Someone let out a low whistle. Mr. Delaney's face flushed, not with anger, but with something closer to embarrassment. He walked to the board, took the chalk from her hand, and began checking her work himself. Line by line, step by step. His frown deepened, but not because she was wrong, because she was right, completely, undeniably right. He erased nothing, changed nothing. When he reached the end, he just stood there for a long moment staring at the answer. Then he turned to her. "Where did you learn this?" She shrugged, eyes down. "Books, online videos. Sometimes I just figure things out. You've never shown this in class. I didn't think it mattered." "It matters," he said, voice lower now. "This is advanced, college level." She didn't respond. She just stood there, small and quiet, while the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some confused, some impressed, some suspicious. She wanted to disappear again, to go back to her corner and pretend none of this happened. But it was too late. Mr. Delaney sighed, rubbing his temple. "All right, you may sit down." She walked back to her seat, head low, face burning. But as she passed the first row, a boy she'd never spoken to gave her a small nod. Another student whispered, "That was insane." Not in a bad way, in awe. The rest of class passed in a blur. Mr. Delaney tried to continue the review, but his heart wasn't in it. He kept glancing at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The students were distracted too, whispering, glancing back at her, some even smiling. When the bell rang, she bolted. Not rudely, but quickly, stuffing her notebook into her bag and heading for the door before anyone could stop her. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. She'd done it. She'd solved it. But instead of feeling proud, she felt exposed. Like she'd accidentally opened a door she'd kept locked for years. She walked fast toward the library, needing the quiet, needing the familiar smell of old paper and dust. But halfway there, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her mom. "Can you pick up your brother? My ride canceled. I'll be late again." She sighed but didn't hesitate. She turned around and headed toward the elementary school. As she walked, she replayed the scene in her head. The equation, the silence, Mr. Delaney's stunned face. Part of her wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to cry. At the elementary school, her brother ran out the moment he saw her, backpack bouncing, face lit up. "You came," he yelled, grabbing her hand. "Of course I came," she said, forcing a smile. He chattered all the way home about his drawing, his math quiz, the new kid who shared his crayons. She listened, nodding, but her mind kept drifting back to the board, to the chalk in her hand, to the moment everything changed. That night, after her brother was asleep and the dishes were done, she sat on her bed with her library book open, but she couldn't focus. Every time she tried to read, she saw Mr. Delaney's face. She heard the whispers. She felt the eyes on her back. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And that scared her more than any equation ever could, because now people would expect things. They'd ask questions. They'd want her to be someone she wasn't sure she could be. Not because she wasn't smart enough, but because being seen meant being vulnerable. And vulnerability in her world was dangerous. Still, as she turned off the light and lay in the dark, a tiny part of her felt something else too. Relief. Like a secret she'd carried alone for so long had finally been set down. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. Maybe Mr. Delaney would ignore her. Maybe he'd call her out again. Maybe the students would treat her differently, like a freak or a show-off, or worse. But one thing was certain. She couldn't go back to being just the quiet girl in the back row. Not after today. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. The next morning, the girl walked into Jefferson High with her hood pulled low and her eyes fixed on the floor. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the chalkboard, heard the silence, felt the weight of every stare. She'd rehearsed a dozen ways to act, cool, indifferent, normal, but none of them felt real. So she settled on what she knew best, quiet. But the school had other plans. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, whispers followed her like shadows. A group of juniors stopped talking when she passed. 2 seniors gave her a nod that felt more like respect than mockery. Even the lunch lady, who usually just grunted when handing out trays, said, "Heard you showed 'em how it's done," with a wink. She kept walking, faster now, heart thudding. She didn't want attention. She never had. But the video had already spread. Someone, probably the kid with the phone in calculus, had posted a short clip online. Just 30 seconds. Her at the board, chalk in hand, solving the impossible equation while the class watched in stunned silence. The caption read, "When your quiet kid is actually a math wizard." It had been shared over 200 times by breakfast. By third period, even students from other grades were peering into room 214 when they passed. One girl slipped a note under her desk that read, "Are you like secretly in college?" She crumpled it and tucked it into her pocket without reading the rest. Mr. Delaney didn't say a word to her when she entered class. He just nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly as she took her seat. But his usual sharpness was gone. He seemed careful, like he was handling something fragile. The lesson that day was review again, but no one asked questions. Everyone was too busy watching her. When Mr. Delaney wrote a practice problem on the board, a much simpler one, half the class turned to see if she'd solve it in her head. She kept her eyes down, pencil still, but then during independent work time, a boy from the front row turned around and whispered, "Hey, can you help me with number 4? I don't get how to start." She hesitated. Helping meant talking. Talking meant being seen. But the boy looked genuinely stuck, brow furrowed, eraser worn down to a nub. She nodded once and leaned over. She didn't give him the answer. She asked questions. What's the derivative of the inside function? Have you tried factoring first? Slowly his eyes lit up. "Oh, I see it now," he said, scribbling furiously. A few others noticed. Soon 2 more students edged closer. "Can you check my work? Is this right?" She helped them too, quietly, patiently, never showing off. Just guiding. Mr. Delaney watched from his desk. He didn't stop them. In fact, for the first time all year, he looked thoughtful. After class, he asked her to stay behind. Her stomach clenched. She braced for criticism. Maybe he thought she was showing off or distracting others. But when the last student left, he closed the door and turned to her. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice low. She looked up, surprised. "I assumed things about you," he continued, rubbing the back of his neck like it was hard to say. "I thought you weren't trying, that you didn't care. But you were miles ahead and I never saw it." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "I've been teaching a long time," he went on, "and I've made a lot of mistakes. But this one, This one bothers me. Because you deserve better, she swallowed. It's okay, she murmured. No, he said gently. It's not. But maybe I can fix it. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. I called the district's gifted education coordinator this morning. There's a program for students like you. Accelerated courses, mentorship, even college credit options. I think you should be in it. She shook her head quickly. I don't need special treatment. This isn't about treatment, he said. It's about giving you what you actually need. You're not being challenged here. And that's my fault. She looked down at her shoes. What if I don't want to be labeled? He sighed. I get that. But hiding your mind isn't helping anyone. Not you, not the kids who could learn from you. You helped 3 students today just by explaining one problem. That matters. She didn't answer. But something in his words stuck. Later that afternoon, as she walked to the library, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't her mom. It was a message from an unknown number. Saw your video. My name's Dr. Lin. I volunteer at the public library. Can we talk? No pressure. She stared at the screen. Dr. Lin. She knew that name. The retired professor who sometimes left advanced math books on the staff picks shelf with little sticky notes like, try this if you're bored. She'd always assumed it was a librarian with a hobby. But Dr. Lin, she typed back, okay. They met at the library after closing. Dr. Lin was in her 70s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and glasses that slid down her nose when she got excited. She didn't shake the girl's hand. She just smiled and said, you solved that equation using Picard iteration, didn't you? I recognized the pattern. The girl's eyes widened. You know that? I taught differential equations at the university for 30 years, Dr. Lin said, pulling out a thermos of tea. And I've never seen a high school student apply that method correctly, let alone explain Lipschitz continuity off the top of their head. They talked for 2 hours. Not about grades or tests, but about math itself. The beauty of proofs, the elegance of symmetry, the thrill of solving something no one else could. For the first time, the girl didn't have to dumb herself down. She could speak freely, passionately, without fear of sounding strange. Dr. Lin listened like every word mattered, and when the girl mentioned she'd been reading old Putnam exam problems for fun, Dr. Lin laughed, a warm, rich sound. You're not just smart, she said. You're a mathematician. The word hung in the air like a promise. Over the next few days, things kept shifting. The principal called her into the office, not for trouble, but to discuss academic opportunities. Her mom got a call too, and for once it wasn't about missed assignments or behavior issues. It was about scholarships, summer programs, testing. Her mom cried that night, not sad tears, proud ones. All this time, she whispered, holding her daughter's hands, I thought you were just getting by. I didn't know you were flying. The girl hugged her tight. I didn't know how to tell you. At school, the whispers didn't stop, but they changed. Instead of, why she's so quiet, it became, did you see her explain that problem? Or, she's tutoring kids at lunch now. She hadn't planned to tutor, but after helping a few classmates, others started asking. She set up a small table in the library corner during lunch, and soon a line formed. She didn't mind. Helping others made the math feel alive, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone in her mind. Then came the assessment. A specialist from the district came to school with a folder full of tests, not just math, but logic, spatial reasoning, verbal analogies. The girl took them in a quiet room. No pressure, no audience. She answered quickly, almost instinctively. Some questions made her smile. Others felt like old friends. A week later, the results came back. Genius-level cognitive ability. Exceptional abstract reasoning. A mind built for complex problem-solving. Mr. Delaney read the report in his classroom alone. He sat for a long time after, staring out the window. Then he picked up the phone and called the district office. I'd like to enroll in the inclusive teaching workshop, he said. The one on supporting gifted students in regular classrooms. Meanwhile, the girl stood in the library holding a letter. Full scholarship offer, summer program at a top university, mentorship from Dr. Lin. She didn't feel like celebrating. She felt responsible, like she'd been given a key and now she had to decide what door to open. That evening, she sat with her brother on the couch, helping him with his spelling words. He looked up at her and said, My teacher said you're really smart. Like super smart, she smiled. I just like figuring things out. Can you teach me to be smart like you? You already are, she said, ruffling his hair. You just haven't found your thing yet. Later, as she lay in bed, she thought about the equation on the board. How it had seemed so huge, so impossible, until she stepped up and saw it clearly. Maybe life was like that too. Maybe the things that scared her most were just problems waiting to be solved, one step at a time. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to ask the questions, and that, she realized, was the real breakthrough. The news about the girl spread beyond the school, not in a flashy way. No news vans or interviews, but in the quiet, steady way real change happens. Teachers from other departments started noticing her in the halls. The chemistry teacher asked if she'd ever considered joining the science Olympiad. The computer science instructor slipped a note into her locker about a coding camp for advanced students. Even the school counselor, who usually only saw kids for scheduling issues, invited her in for a chat about future pathways. But the biggest shift came from Mr. Delaney. He didn't make a big speech or announce some grand reform. Instead, he changed his classroom. Slowly, carefully. He started offering optional challenge problems at the end of each assignment, marked with a small star in the corner. Only if you're curious, he'd say. He stopped calling on students to embarrass them. Instead, he began walking around during work time asking quiet questions like, "What's your thinking here?" Or, "Have you considered this angle?" And every Monday, he left a new advanced math puzzle on the back bulletin board. No names, no grades, just a problem for anyone who wanted to try. Within weeks, a small group of students started gathering during lunch to work on them together. The girl was among them, but she wasn't the only one anymore. A boy who'd once failed algebra was now scribbling integrals in his notebook. A girl who barely spoke in class stayed after to debate solution methods with Mr. Delaney. He never said it out loud, but everyone knew. He was trying to make up for what he'd done. One afternoon, after school, he asked the girl to stay behind again. This time he didn't look nervous, he looked resolved. "I've been accepted into a professional development program," he said, holding a printed email. "It's about teaching gifted students in mixed ability classrooms. Starts next month." She nodded, unsure what to say. "I know I can't undo what happened," he continued, "but I can do better. And I want you to know I see you now. Not just your grades, not just your quietness. I see how your mind works, and it's something special." She looked down, then back up. "Thank you," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. Meanwhile, her life outside school began to shift too. Her mom, energized by the news of her daughter's potential, started asking questions, real ones. "What do you love about math? What kind of problems make you excited?" They'd never talked like this before. Her mom had always been too tired, too focused on survival. But now, over bowls of soup at the kitchen table, they talked about dreams. "I used to want to be an engineer," her mom admitted one night, stirring her tea. "But I had to drop out when I got pregnant with you. Life. It pulls you in directions you don't plan." The girl reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You still helped me get here." Her mom smiled, eyes glistening. "Yeah, maybe I did." At the library, Dr. Lin became more than a mentor. She became a friend. Every Saturday morning, they met at a corner table with thermoses of tea and stacks of books. Sometimes they worked on problems. Sometimes they just talked about life, loss, curiosity, and the quiet joy of understanding something deeply. "You don't have to be famous to matter," Dr. Lin told her once. "You don't have to win awards or publish papers. Just keep thinking. Keep asking questions." That's enough. Those words stuck with her, because part of her still worried. What if she couldn't live up to the genius label? What if she failed at the university program? What if people expected her to be perfect? But Dr. Lin reminded her, intelligence isn't about being flawless. It's about being brave enough to be curious. Back at school, the girl started something small. She noticed a few younger students, 7th and 8th graders, lingering near the high school math wing during lunch, peeking into classrooms like they were watching magic shows. One day she approached them. "You like math?" she asked. They nodded shyly. "Want to try a puzzle?" That Saturday, she held her first unofficial math circle in the public library. 5 kids showed up. She didn't teach them formulas. She gave them riddles, logic games, pattern challenges. She let them argue, guess, make mistakes. She watched their eyes light up when they solved something on their own. Dr. Lin sat in the back sipping tea, smiling. Word got around. By the third week, 12 kids came. By the fifth, they had to move to a bigger room. The school district took notice. The gifted education coordinator visited one session, then asked if she'd be willing to help design a pilot program for overlooked students, kids who didn't test well but showed deep thinking in other ways. Kids like she used to be, she agreed. Not because she wanted to be a leader, but because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. At home, things got a little easier. Her mom found a slightly better paying job with more regular hours. They didn't have extra money, but they had more time. Some evenings, her brother would sit with her while she read, pretending to study his own books, just to be near her. He started calling her professor as a joke, but there was pride in his voice. One night, as they washed dishes together, he asked, "Do you think I could do what you do someday?" She turned off the faucet and looked at him. "You already do," she said. "You ask the best questions. That's where it starts." He grinned, foam on his nose. School became different too. She still sat in the back row, but now it wasn't to hide. It was because she liked the view. She raised her hand sometimes. Not to show off, but to clarify, to connect ideas, to help others see what she saw. Mr. Delaney would nod when she spoke, not with surprise, but with respect. And the other students? They stopped whispering. They started asking, "Can you look at this? Does this make sense? How'd you think of that?" She answered patiently, always bringing it back to understanding, not just answers. One day, a freshman girl stayed after class, eyes red like she'd been crying. "I failed the last quiz," she whispered. "I thought I was getting it, but I'm not. I'm just..." Source to the girl remembered that feeling, the shame, the fear of being left behind. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper. "Let's start from the beginning," she said gently. "No judgment. Just you and the math." They worked for an hour. By the end, the girl wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling. "It's like the pieces finally fit." "That's how it's supposed to feel," the older girl said. After that, she started a peer tutoring group, officially with school approval. It met twice a week in the library. She trained other students to tutor too, teaching them how to ask guiding questions instead of giving answers. "The goal isn't to make them dependent on you," she told them. "It's to help them trust their own minds." Mr. Delaney let them use his classroom on Fridays. He even sat in sometimes, not as a teacher, but as a learner. "You've got a gift for this," he told her once after watching her help a struggling student grasp a tough concept. "Not just the math, the way you make people feel capable." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just said, "Thanks." As the school year wound down, decisions had to be made. The university scholarship offer was real. Full ride, housing included. A chance to start college early, surrounded by people who thought like her, but it meant leaving. Leaving her brother. Leaving her mom. Leaving the kids at the library who now looked up to her. She talked to Dr. Lin about it. "You don't have to choose between helping others and growing yourself," Dr. Lin said. "In fact, the best minds do both. You can go to the program, learn everything you can, and bring it back. Knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared." That helped. But the real clarity came from her mom. One evening, as they folded laundry together, her mom said, "I know you're scared to go, but I'm more scared of you staying because you think you have to." The girl looked up, surprised. "You've carried this family for a long time," her mom continued, voice soft but firm, "and I'm grateful. But it's not your job to hold us together. We'll be okay, and you need to fly." Tears welled up, but she blinked them away. "What if I fail?" "Then you'll figure it out," her mom said, smiling. "You always do." The next day, she accepted the scholarship, but she didn't stop there. She worked with the district to turn her tutoring group into a permanent after-school program. She trained 3 other students to lead it over the summer. She left detailed notes, problem sets, and even recorded short video explanations for the younger kids to watch. She also asked Mr. Delaney for one last favor. "Will you keep the challenge board going?" she asked. "Even after I'm gone?" He nodded. "Every Monday, without fail." On her last day of school, she didn't make a speech. She didn't stand on a stage. She just walked through the hall saying quiet goodbyes. To the librarian. To the lunch lady. To the kids in her math circle. To the students she'd tutored. At the end of the day, she stopped by room 214. Mr. Delaney was erasing the board, his back to the door. He turned when he heard her footsteps. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Then he said, "You changed this place." She shook her head. "We both did." He smiled, a real one with no tension in it. "Go be brilliant," he said. She nodded. "I'll try." As she walked out of the school for the last time, backpack light for once, she didn't feel like the quiet girl in the back row anymore. She felt like herself, and that was more than enough. Graduation day dawned warm and bright, the kind of June morning that felt like a promise. The girl stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the folds of her cap and gown. It was slightly too big, borrowed from a cousin who'd graduated 2 years before, but it fit well enough. Her mom had stayed up late the night before, carefully ironing it and pinning a small white rose to the lapel. "For luck," she'd whispered, kissing her forehead. Downstairs, her brother bounced on the couch, already dressed in his best shirt, tie crooked. "You're really leaving today?" he asked, voice small. She sat beside him and straightened his tie. "Not forever," she said. "Just for school. I'll be back for holidays. And summer." He nodded, but his eyes were shiny. She pulled him into a hug. "You'll be okay," she said. "And you've got Mom. And the math circle kids still need you to run the Friday games." He managed to smile. "I'll beat your high score in the logic puzzle challenge." "You better," she teased. Outside, the car horn beeped. Dr. Lin had offered to drive them to the ceremony. As they pulled away from the curb, the girl looked back at their apartment building one last time. It wasn't much, but it held everything that mattered. Late-night talks, shared silence, the sound of her brother's laugh, the smell of rice cooking on the stove. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew this place had shaped her in ways she'd carry forever. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, parents snapping photos, students laughing, teachers beaming with pride. She found her seat among the graduates, cap slightly askew, heart pounding. She scanned the crowd and spotted Mr. Delaney near the back, standing alone, hands in his pockets. He caught her eye and gave a small, solemn nod. She nodded back. Then she saw them, the kids from the library math circle sitting together in a cluster, waving tiny handmade signs that read, "Go, Professor," and "Solve the Future." She had to look away quickly, blinking back tears. The ceremony began. Speeches droned on about perseverance, dreams, and the road ahead. She listened, but her mind kept drifting, to the chalkboard that started it all, to the quiet nights in the library, to the moment she realized her mind wasn't a burden, but a gift. Then came the surprise. The principal stepped to the podium again, clearing his throat. "Before we conclude, there's one more honor to bestow. This year's valedictorian has chosen to speak, despite her well-known preference for quiet. Please welcome our very own." The applause started slow, then built into something roaring. She stood, legs trembling, and walked to the stage. The microphone loomed large. She adjusted it, took a breath, and looked out at the sea of faces. She didn't read from notes. She spoke from the heart. "I never wanted to stand up here," she began, voice quiet but clear. "For a long time I thought being smart meant being alone. That if I showed what I could do, people would think I was showing off, or worse, that I thought I was better than them. So I stayed quiet. I hid." She paused, glancing at Mr. Delaney. "But sometimes the people who don't say much are listening the hardest. And sometimes the ones who seem ordinary are carrying something extraordinary inside." A few parents wiped their eyes. Her mom sat in the front row, hand over her mouth, beaming. "I used to think intelligence was about getting the right answer fast," she continued. "But I've learned it's really about asking the right questions. About being curious enough to keep going when things get hard. About helping others find their own answers, not just giving them yours." She looked at the math circle kids. "And I've learned that brilliance isn't loud. It doesn't always raise its hand. Sometimes it's quiet, waiting for someone to believe it exists." The room was utterly still. "I'm not here because I'm perfect," she said softly. "I'm here because people saw me when I tried to disappear. Because a teacher admitted he was wrong. Because a librarian saved books for me. Because my mom worked double shifts so I could dream. Because kids trusted me to help them learn." She took a deep breath. "So if you take one thing from today, let it be this. Don't wait for permission to be who you are. Don't hide your light because you're afraid it'll blind someone. Shine anyway. And when you see someone else trying to shine, help them. Don't dim them. Lift them." She stepped back from the mic. The applause wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. Students stood, Teachers clapped with tears in their eyes. Even Mr. Delaney was clapping, his face red, nodding fiercely. After the ceremony, she was swarmed, not by reporters but by classmates, younger students, even a few teachers. Will you come back and visit? Can you send us problem sets? Will you still run the math circle online? She promised she would. Later, as the crowd thinned, Mr. Delaney approached. He didn't say much, just handed her a small wrapped book. For the road, he said. She opened it. It was a first edition copy of How to Solve It by George Polya, the classic guide to mathematical thinking. Inside the cover, he'd written, "To the student who taught me how to see, Mr. D." She hugged him then, awkwardly, quickly, but he hugged her back, patting her shoulder like a proud uncle. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, she sat on the porch with her mom and brother, eating ice cream from paper cups. No grand speeches. No fanfare, just the three of them, quiet and together. "I'm proud of you," her mom said simply. "I'm proud of us," the girl replied. The next morning, she packed her bags. Not much fit, a few clothes, her favorite math books, the white rose now dried and pressed between pages of a notebook, and a photo of the three of them taken last Christmas. Dr. Lin drove her to the train station. "You'll do great," she said, squeezing her hand. "And remember, math isn't just numbers. It's connection. It's pattern. It's hope. You're taking that with you." At the university, the world opened wider than she'd imagined. Lecture halls filled with students who spoke her language, the language of curiosity, of what if, and why not. She made friends who didn't care about her past, only her ideas. Professors invited her to research projects. She joined a study group that met under the stars, solving problems on napkins and arguing about the elegance of proofs. But she didn't forget home. Every Sunday, she video called her brother. Every month, she sent problem sets to the math circle. She even started a blog, simple, no fancy graphics, just clear explanations of cool math ideas, written so a 7th grader could understand. It got shared in schools across the state. Back in her hometown, the tutoring program grew. Mr. Delaney, now trained in gifted education, helped expand it to 3 other schools. The district adopted universal screening for advanced potential, not just based on grades, but on creativity, persistence, and depth of thinking. Kids who once slipped through the cracks now had a chance to be seen, and every Monday, without fail, a new challenge problem appeared on the bulletin board in room 214. Years later, when she returned for a visit, now a graduate student, still quiet but no longer hiding, she walked into the library and found a new math circle in session. A girl about her brother's age was explaining a geometry proof to a group of wide-eyed kids, using hand-drawn diagrams and patient questions. The girl looked up and saw her. Her eyes widened. You're the one from the video," she smiled. "Just someone who liked math." She stayed for the rest of the session, not as a star, but as a helper. Afterward, as she walked out into the evening light, she passed the old high school. Through a window, she saw Mr. Delaney, grayer now, slower, but still writing on the board, still teaching. He saw her too, waved. She waved back. She didn't need a spotlight. She didn't need a title. She'd found something better, a life where her mind could grow and her heart could give back. And as she walked toward the bus stop, the wind warm on her face, she knew one thing for sure: the quietest voices often carry the furthest if someone's willing to listen.